despite the fact that the government already committed to closing it down by 2017, today the Director General of the Ministry of Environment said that it's going to be extended at least in one more year. And from here, I want to say that 2 weeks ago, a fireman died from ammonia, from 1.5 tons of ammonia that leaked in Emek Hefer. And in Haifa, you have 12,000 tons of ammonia. And there was an emergency discussion in the Knesset at which nobody from the Environmental Protection Ministry said anything about this delay. 2 weeks afterwards, we see this news now. And from here, I'm calling upon, first of all, the municipality of Haifa. If there's anybody here, the mayor of Haifa has the power to remove the business permit from the ammonia reservoir and just close it down. And also to Netanyahu, the prime minister, who without a minister of environmental protection and without a director general in his office, he's the one who's going to be responsible if thousands of people die. The estimates are of many thousands of people who will die if there's a leak from the ammonia tank. So with no further ado, I'm going back to this, which is also very annoying, which is the way that the offshore drilling in the sea are managed. So this is what I'm supposed to be talking about, environmental risks, and this is what I'm talking about, the failures of the government. First of all, just to give you a little bit of what goes on in the way seas and oceans are being managed today, there's a huge hype around the world because the seas and the oceans are important for the environment and for animals and everything. But first of all and above everything, they're a source of oxygen, of food, and with us, especially in Israel, of water, of drinking water. And if we do not protect the sea and we don't understand the real implications of what it means not to protect the sea, then we're not going to have any water or oxygen or food. And what else do we need? I mean, that said, just last summer, John Kerry actually had a first ever conference on the need to preserve the seas and the oceans, saying that it's an international security issue. And Barack Obama also dedicated millions and millions of square kilometers in the ocean for the preservation of areas. So this is an answer, first of all, for Arnon Sofer, who wants to have a highway in our Mediterranean, because if we have CO2 emissions in the sea, we're going to have less oxygen and less air, and so that's not something that we're going to allow. And also, you know, we need public transportation. There's need of better management of everything, but not put highways in the sea. That's not the solution. Never mind, not in a tunnel and not above. Okay. Also, we have huge celebrities around the world coming on board in this protection, and I hope that in Israel we have this as well. We've been calling for the management of the sea in Israel, for the establishment of a marine and shore authority for over 4 years now. We published our first paper in 2011, and thankfully the government already started working on a program, but unfortunately they're not working fast enough. And just the other day, last week, I was at a meeting with the group that is discussing the policy paper, the policy plan to be prepared for the management of the sea. And they're basically going back and doing everything all over again, despite the fact that they've already invested 2 years in it. So for this, I would like to commend the University of Haifa for having the program led by Shammai Asif here. Unfortunately, they're not speaking amongst themselves, the university and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which is classic for Israel, but I hope something will happen on that as well. I would also like to say that this is in last year's conference about the sea, I had to fight with half the university to receive the right to come and speak about environment. And today, I'm not the first speaker to speak about environment, and it's really something that I'm joyful about, so I wanted to say that as well. I'm going to run through the things that everybody knows already. You know, there's a huge blessing. Everybody is hoping to have energy independence and water and money, and gas is a positive thing. But as much as that's a blessing, we know that there's a huge curse aside with it. Now, everybody knows about the Gulf of Mexico, and I had many conversations about it. We can't compare it. We can't compare it. Israel has 190 kilometers of beach. That's all we have, and we're an island. We need the sea, so there's no way to compare. We have a small, closed basin. I'm sure people here know, at least as well as I do, that experts say that it takes a drop of water between 80 to 100 years before it leaves the Mediterranean. So whatever we spill inside stays with us. We need to take that into consideration. Cyprus had an oil leak. It was from an oil tank in July of last year. The same happened in Kosamet, which is a beautiful white sand island, and this is what happened to it after only 50 tons spilt, and it was in the middle of the summer, and it killed their entire tourism season. I'm not even talking about the money. The Israeli companies, the companies working here, Israeli and Noble Energy for that matter, don't have the magnitude of financial abilities to pay what BP had paid. So we need to protect ourselves from that too. I'm not going to go into the entire procedure because I understood that it was discussed to some extent. We're not against the offshore drilling. It's very important for me to say. This, by the way, is a translation of a slide by the Ministry of Environmental Protection talking about the effects that it has which aren't in emergency. And there are many, many effects during times that aren't emergency as well. It doesn't have to have an oil leak in order to affect the life in the sea and the sea itself. But of course, in time of emergency, it's much worse. We're not against the offshore drilling as an NGO. Other organizations similar to us in the world just go out and say, no, don't drill in the sea. We are Israeli. We understand the needs. We understand the need in independence and everything. But we're saying, do it responsibly, because no matter where you look, and this is just going through. We want our beaches to stay the way they are this way. They're nice. As I said, we don't have a lot. And also, don't think of it only from a environmental aspect, because the financial effects are huge, and nobody really understands to the biggest extent that it's going to affect each and every one of you, because everybody sees, like in the cartoons, they see the dollar bills running around in their eyes beforehand thinking of the potential, but they don't realize that all the desalination plants need a clean water, need a clean sea, and if they don't work, then we're still going to be paying them because they have these contracts with the government. So we're going to be paying the desalination plants, and we're going to be paying more for water because we're not going to have any clean water, and for fruits and vegetables. All our electricity plants are along the coast, and they need clean water to produce electricity. Our tourism industry, which we're very proud of, all in marine commerce, which are the majority of commerce, most of the goods coming into Israel, the little fishery that we still have, and the quality of life, because at a very pressing country like Israel, we need to go to the beach. And along the beach, there are a lot of financial things that have to do with quality of life as well, which are the various sports which have become very, very popular in Israel in the past few years. And of course, we need to protect the sea and to do whatever needs to fix the sea after such a damage happens, which is very costly as well. And there are many, many other costs to be taken into consideration. In Salul right now, we're in the final stages of writing together a paper on the financial, everything all the costs that you need in order to prepare up front, which include having the legislation and having equipment and having everything, which isn't very cheap. I'm not saying that it's cheap, but this is a lot more expensive. And even if the chances aren't very high for it to happen, we can't take this chance. Because the way that the deep sea in Israel today, well, we don't have deep sea, we have the EEZ, is really the Wild West. Somebody else already said that as well. It's basically no man's land. They can do whatever they want there, mostly the companies drilling for oil and gas. There's a huge list of things that need to be taken care of once you start working in the sea. You need to have appropriate environmental legislation and accident preventions and adjustment and quality of drilling equipment, because we have deep sea drilling here, and we need to protect the environment, and we need to have the permit process with transparency and with public participation in it. We need to have financial liabilities like guarantees and insurances and enforcement mechanism. None of the things that we have here on the list are intact in Israel, which it's just so frustrating. No matter where you look, nothing is run well enough. And we're saying again, you want to drill in the sea, fine, but just do it responsibly. There's a story in Hebrew, in Yiddish, about Chelem. Chelem is like the town of the stupid. And in Chelem, when they had this road on which cars would just go by and fall down all the time. So instead of fixing the road, they built a hospital on the bottom. That's the way we're managing all the uses of our sea, and it's just so frustrating. So just let's take an example of the environmental guidelines, which is the basic thing that you'd think by now Israel would have. We need to have emission permits, poison permits, environmental impact assessments, emergency plan trainings, discharge permits. This should have been intact already 3 years ago. It's still not. Now, I'm saying this with a lot of appreciation to the person who's in charge of it, who's in this room today. The problem is that the government doesn't understand that it needs to put a lot more money and a lot more attention into bringing personnel, into bringing professionals, because the people who are managing it today in the ministries, in the Ministry of Environmental Protection and in the Ministry of Energy, have 3, 4, some of them worked in the Soviet Union, but on land drilling, but most of them have 3, 4 years of experience in offshore drilling, and they work with professionals who've been working for decades in the sea. And then, you know, there's kind of a difference in it's ze lo kochot, we say in Hebrew. It's just not fair. And for instance, you have these Americans coming with a very heavy Texan accent as well. And they come and they do these presentations and they're like, and they don't understand half what's said. And then they look at each other and what do you think? What do you think? Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very impressive. And they give the permits. And there's no real transparency. There's no public participation in it. None of it is open for the public to also be able to comment on it. So it's just being dealt in closed rooms. This also is a slide translated from the Ministry of Environment Protection's presentation. You can see here the amount of regulation and overseeing in the exclusive economic zone and in the territorial waters. Now, in Israel, when we want to talk about the bureaucracy and about, you know, about having too much bureaucracy, we always talk about how difficult it is to close, if we want to shut down a porch in our house and make it into a room, we need to go to a lot of committees and a lot of approvals. In the sea, it's half the work. It's much difficult to shut down a terrace on land than it is in sea. And this just can't go on. Now, we've been talking about it, and we're trying to create a coalition of whoever would be affected by it, but it's like nobody really understands or really doesn't really care. And there are laws that need to be implemented. We have the Oil Act. It's from 1952. It doesn't even have one environmental clause in it. And we've been working on creating the marine law. I've heard people talk about it here. But nothing is happening with it. And why? Because Noble Energy don't want it to happen. So if they're pressuring the Ministry of Energy, who's pressuring the Ministry of Justice, it's just not going to happen. And we need to have a fierceful and powerful Ministry of Environment, and we need to have a Ministry of Justice who understands its responsibility to protect our seas. Also, Amir Peretz isn't in the office anymore, But we need to have separation of authority, because the first thing that was learned after the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was already implemented in the United States and in the European Directive for Offshore Drilling, is that there needs to be a separation of authorities. You cannot have the one entity whose job is to create the entire community and to develop the entire energy market, which is very important. I'm not saying that it's not, but they cannot be the ones who are also protecting the environment, because it makes a clash of interests. But if you speak to the Ministry of Energy, there's no way they're going to accept with this. So they're doing everything they can to prevent it, and they have a lot of excuses, but at the end of the day, they're really harming us here. Also, the Ministry of Environmental Protection is in a huge mess internally in everything that has to do with creating the preparedness for an emergency, because we don't have the equipment, we don't have trained personnel, they don't have boats. We saw the boats and all the pictures of cleaning up the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. We don't have the same things on the Israeli side, and there's no law, despite the fact that already in 2008 they were supposed to create this law. That was a government decision already in 2008 that there should be a law to protect it. It was before even having the oil drills. It was for preparedness for an oil spill from a ship. And as I said, there's no insurance and guarantees. So what we did, we gave the state controller all this information 3 years ago, and already 2 years ago he issued his first report on this issue, basically saying all these things that I just said to you and some more about not having enough knowledge, not enough research. This picture is very known to the people of Haifa because it was here on Mount Carmel. It was a huge fire which became the symbol of mismanagement by government, because once the fire broke, only then they started to see and to learn what causes they had in order to manage it and to stop the fire. We're saying that it's not if we continue managing the offshore drilling the way they are, it's not if, it's when something is going to happen, and the question is how we're going to deal with it. What we did is we recognized the European Directive for Offshore Drilling. They have an array of solutions that if we adopt them, the majority of our problems is going to be solved. We translated into Hebrew because we didn't want anybody to say it's in English, we don't understand. And then we made this table which summarizes what goes on in the European Directive and what goes on in Israel. We made it as simple as possible for everybody to understand, but still it's not working. We got a little bit more people are starting to speak about the directive already. These are some of the things that we did. We tried speaking to analysts from the financial markets in order to make it into their issue, and we brought experts from abroad to speak with them, but they said they don't care because it's not their costs. We took people, our activists were dressed in black, they painted themselves in black, and they went with the oil and with gouache paint, and they marked people with a hand saying, don't let our beaches. And we did many other things. As I said, we translated the directive. One of our biggest issues was just last week, we filed a petition against the Ministry of Energy to the High Court on the fact that there is on the fact of the guarantees. What happens is that we managed to discover that despite obliged by law, the Ministry of Energy just doesn't collect the guarantees which are aimed at protecting us for the first costs that would be if there is a case of emergency. So after we threatened the Ministry of Energy on taking them to court for not publishing the guarantees. Then they published the guarantees, and they lowered the costs of what they initially became. Oh, it's not working. Shite. Okay, I had a whole thing here with things moving around, but it's not working. Basically, we got a member of Knesset to get information from the Ministry of Energy showing that in the past, they went for the worst case scenarios and they asked for a lot more money, and now they're asking for a lot less. And we took them to court, and now we're hoping for something to happen with this, because otherwise, it's not only in Israel, but mostly in Israel, we understand only this way, I'm afraid. There's the Petroleum Council, which is basically a rubber stamp council, I'm afraid. I spoke to somebody, a member of the council, who's been a member of the council for, I don't know, 3 years or so. And this person said to me a few weeks ago, and I swear this is like exactly, did you know that Noble Energy are Americans? And I said, excuse me? And this person said, yeah, I thought they were British. And this person is on the Petroleum Council for 3 years. And despite the fact that the law obliges having 2 environmental protection representatives from the Ministry of Environmental Protection in the council, only now, a lot of it was also from our pushing from all over. One of them has been accepted already. She's been in 2 meetings. And the second person, for some reason, they're not approving him. He's the person in the Ministry of Environment who's in charge of open territories. And surprise, surprise, the Ministry of Energy are saying that it's a conflict of interest. So they didn't approve him, and now they're talking about it. But that's what he's supposed to do, is to protect the open territories. So hopefully that would change. We're also initiating a campaign about the fact that the Ministry of Environmental Protection is not prepared, as I said. And we took the law proposal by the Ministry of Justice, the one that's been stopped and prevented by Noble Energy and the Ministry of Energy, and we went with this to one of the other MKs who cares about this, and we put it on the table as our own private law proposal, and hopefully it will be discussed later on this Knesset session. All of these things and many, many more are being done by a relatively very small NGO. This should not be the job of an NGO. We must have, as soon as possible, a Marine and Shore Authority that would do these things, because there's nobody in the Israeli government and in the Israeli society that has a bigger picture of the entire impact and who takes all these things into mind. Who do we want to be? Do we want to be like Norway, or do we want to be like what's going on in Nigeria, despite the fact that they have so many treasures there? We can't afford this to ourselves. I want to take this opportunity really quick. We have here people from university. We have professionals. Tzalul has Sea Defenders. Sea Defenders basically is a network of everybody who loves the sea and doesn't want to have it changed. Now, we have people from government, we have people from financial worlds. People can call us in and give us information. We're very, very, we keep secrets and discreet. And I call on you, come to us, use us, let us be your voice in the Knesset. We're very strong in the Knesset and in the government. We have good contacts with everybody. We appreciate the majority of the professionals, and we have our discussions with the politicians, but we can help you and we can change these things, and we need everybody's help. Thank you very much.